please tell us your name and how you came to live in the community of Clear Lake?
Well, my name is DawnCress. My original name before I was married was Dawn Telejohn, and so I have always lived in the Clear Lake School District.
Could you close the door?
Oh, yeah.
And so I went through all my school years here. And my brother Greg was a year older, but they didn't bus kids in I lived out in the country, and they didn't bus kids in for kindergarten. But the year I turned 5, I could go to kindergarten here in Clear Lake. And you know where the museum building is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was where the kindergarten classes were, in that building. And so then when I went to first grade, do you know what a one-room country schoolhouse is?
Yeah.
Okay.
No idea.
You don't. Okay. Back in the day before they had big schools, they usually built smaller schoolhouses a mile or two in a community, so because a lot of kids had to walk to school. And so the school I went from first and second grade was a one-room schoolhouse. There were 2 of us in first grade, a couple of kids in second grade, a few kids in each of the grades. And that was probably in 1958 when I started school, so 59. And then they were closing all the little one-room schoolhouses. So by second grade, they closed the one-room schoolhouse out on Highway 63. Those kids were bused over to our school, and then the Clear Lake School District, it passed by one vote to build a whole new school building out our way. And so that building is still standing. It's now used as a church. Well, it was used as a church. Now someone lives there. And we had grades 1 through 6. There were 2 classrooms. We had a gymnasium and with a cafeteria space there to serve lunch. And they brought our lunches out from school here, well, the old high school building. And then in 7th grade, you were bused into the Clear Lake High School, like where your grandpa would have went to school. That's where I went to school. And anything else you'd like to know about the school?
No.
Okay.
Well, we do have a few school questions. Your teachers. Like, what teachers did you have? Were there any that you particularly liked or disliked, or?
Well, when you had the one-room country schoolhouse, everybody had the same teacher. So when you're sitting in your desk as a first grader, you got to hear what the 6th graders were learning that day too. But our teacher we had was Mrs. Holmes. I would say she was one of my favorites in elementary school. She made it a lot of fun to go to school, and she traveled to a lot of different places, so she would share about her trips and things and always bring us back a souvenir. And yeah, so she was one of my favorite. In high school, Mr. Moore, he taught history, and Mr. Johnson was teaching, and then Mr. Moore came, and so history was my favorite subject. So I like learning about the past.
That's always fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
and hopefully you learn from the past, so you don't, you can make good decisions or you can make bad decisions based on the past.
Were you in any clubs or sports?
Well, as being a girl, now I would have been going to school, like started in 1958 through the 60s, and I graduated in 1970. Girls were not allowed to play sports. It's just how society was. Boys could play, you know, they had the typical sports, basketball, football, wrestling. The only thing they allowed us girls to possibly do is try out for, we had cheerleaders. I got to be a cheerleader when I was a sophomore in high school. And so that was a very coveted thing to do because very few girls got to do it. And so you went to all the games. So like during the winter, you would go 4 nights a week because you'd be cheering for 2 basketball games and you'd be cheering for wrestling matches. And so it kept you quite busy. The other activity a girl could do was if you could be a majorette for the band where you twirl the batons. And I did not do that. I was in band, but I was not a majorette. And I believe it was 1972 when the laws passed in this country to allow girls to play in organized sports. And it's all alive and well today. And and Caitlin Clark has just really made women's basketball a real important sport, I'd say.
To be honest, nowadays the female basketball and those sports are a lot better than the men.
Yes, they are. They're just as good as men. So, and of course the Olympics. So,
did you have any family traditions?
Family traditions. Well, I grew up on a dairy farm, and tradition, you know, we had the typical, I think what most people have, your holiday family get-togethers at all the major holidays, and you celebrated the 4th of July, and it was a big deal to have sparklers. So
is the home you grew up in still here?
it is, and in fact, if you know who Caitlin and Sophie and Brooklyn and Hunter Telejohn, okay, the house that they are living in is the house I grew up in. And they are on what the family farm was back when I was young. And so the house is still there, yes.
Your family, like, what did your parents do, and all, how many siblings did you have, and what were they like and stuff?
Okay, I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I was second to the oldest, and what was the question? My parents, we ran a dairy farm. So when you have a farm, especially back then, if you had children, as soon as you were old enough, you were expected to help, which we all did. And you started out as a young kid and feeding calves, because you had an individual bucket. You had to go feed each individual calf. And you would sweep the barn floors and everything else. And as you got older, you were taught how to milk the cows. And back then, you didn't have a pipeline milking parlor or anything. The milk was dumped in what we called a shotgun pail, and you carried it to the milk house, dumped it in there were strainers on top that had a straining pad. You poured it on the top there, and it got strained down through. And that bulk tank, originally before bulk tanks, there were individual milk cans. And they had like a tank that had cold water in, so the milk was poured in the cans, and it was kept cold by the water till the milk truck got there to pick it up. But then they invented bulk tanks, which were stainless steel, and then the big truck would come and bring a big hose, and down below there was a valve that it would get fastened onto, and it would take and that's what they do today now too, is have the bulk tanks. And summertime, you as a kid, we all picked rock, You know, you didn't enjoy doing it, but you had to do it, and because you had to get the rocks off the field, and so it was always hot. And then as you got older, you were able to learn how to drive the tractors and help, you know, drive the hay wagons and whatnot. And then as you got older again, um, they had the smaller hay bales, and so um, we had. Do you know what a hay mow is?
Nope.
Okay. In the barns when I grew up, the cows were in where the cement floor was, and up above was like an upstairs to the barn, and that had a floor, and that's where the bales were stacked. And you would back the wagon up. There would be a track in the ceiling of the barn, and it was called a hay fork. And they were the fork part was metal, and they were sharp, they had points, and it would come down and it would lower it down. Somebody would be up on the wagon. It would hold, I don't remember how many bales it would hold at one time, but it was run by a pulley system, and we had to stand down below and pull the rope out to get it going. And once it got going, then it was all kind of automatic. It would pull the hay up, the track would take it over and drop it over there in that part of the barn. And after a couple of loads, if you were old enough, you had to go up in where the bales were, and then you had to stack them. Because if they were stacked neat, then you could get more hay in the barn. So It was a lot of work, but that's what you did.
Mm-hmm. What did you do for fun?
What do we do for fun? For me, being a farm kid, it was, you know, we didn't have phones and everything like you guys have. And so 4-H was a big deal, and you had projects, and so you'd get together with kids your own age in your community. I always showed cattle at the Glenwood Fair, but there was all sorts of projects you could take, and so it was like a club, and you just learned from showing your projects, you know, cooking, cattle, plants, gardening, crops, whatever. And 4-H is still a active organization today. As a girl, I could play 4-H softball. You know, the clubs would have a ball team, and you had to have at least 2 girls on the team. And I played second base. So for me, that was my kind of fun. The other thing we did for fun, do you know where Deronda is? Mm-hmm. Okay, if you go to Amory and you go out on F, there was a little community called Deronda. They had a roller skating rink. Mm-hmm. So our 4-H group would go several times a winter. We'd go roller skating. And there would always be kids there, and you paid money to get in, you rented your skates, and there was a big rink, and they played fun music. And this is, you know, especially when you got to be a teenager, it was a fun place to go because you might see a cute girl or a cute guy. And in fact, your Grandpa Paul and your Uncle Craig, mm-hmm. and Craig and I would go roller skating together. So we were all in 4-H together. So you could ask him about what he remembers about 4-H. So that was a fun thing. The other thing made me think of it when I kept newspapers from back then. And there used to be a movie theater in Amory. There was movie theaters in all the little towns. And so you could go to a movie. And a lot of those little theaters are gone now. I think the closest is St. Croix Falls or Hudson, and I do miss that. So anyway, as a younger kid, we would go to, everybody had 4 or 5 kids, and you had neighbors next door. You would ride your bike over to the neighbors and play with your neighbor kids. And, you know, you made your own kind of fun. You'd build forts and play cowboys and Indians, stuff that I don't think kids play anymore, but that's what we did as young people. So,
What did your parents do for a living?
they were farmers. So that was a lot of work, and my mom would go to the barn too and help milk the cows too. Plus, you know, she took care of the house and everything too. And
Did you have family members who also live here?
yes, I had a brother Greg who was a year older than I was, and then my brother Mark was 3 years younger, and then I had 2 younger sisters. So there was 5 of us, and we all graduated here from Clear Lake.
What year did you graduate? 1970?
1970, yes, yes. Brought my annual too.
Did you ever meet or know Burley Grimes or Gaylord Nelson?
I have an autograph from Burley Grimes, and after he was, this is when he was older, and he signed these cards for us, and he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. And then Gaylord Nelson, because I graduated in 1970 and he was from Clear Lake, it was arranged for him to be our commencement guest speaker. Earth Day was started in 1970 and in April, and is today the anniversary of Earth Day?
Yes, it would, about somewhere around there. Yep.
Yeah. Have you talked about it at school at all?
Yeah,
Earth
this
Day?
is a part of our Earth Day
yes.
activities.
And so, you know, that was a very new thing to have an Earth Day. You know, as kids growing up, you just lived a simple life, and it was Gaylord Nelson, I think, because he grew up in Wisconsin. He was our governor first, and then he went on to be a U.S. senator. And he was still a senator when he came and spoke at our graduation. So I have his autograph here that he gave me. And I've got the newspaper from my graduation. So I had to straighten out this paper today here. And he was trying to get the people to realize, you know, how pollution, we had never heard the word pollution before till he made us aware of it. And I think because Wisconsin has some of the Great Lakes here and a lot of nice lakes and rivers, he was very concerned of what pollution was going to do to our lakes and streams, and wanted to make people aware of what pollution does.
Were there ever violent crimes committed here?
Violent crimes, I'm not aware of violent crimes. You know, we had a local police officer here, Lester Wood, and you know, it would be more traffic type, you know, infractions that he would arrest you for. I'm not aware of any really super bad crimes like people shooting each other or anything like that. So,
Do you remember the railroad?
I do. The railroad was still operating when I was going to school. and the tracks came right through, where where the water tower is, and just this side of it, there was a railroad depot there. That's where the tracks were. It's where the snowmobile trail goes through, is where the railroad tracks used to be. And so I remember when we were all 16 and we had started getting our driver's license, and a carload of us girls were in town for something for school, and when we got done, one of the girls that had a driver's license, we were all piled into her car, and we were driving around and laughing and having a good time, and we were driving up Main Street, and we were busy talking, and all of a sudden she slammed on the brakes because here the railroad crossing, a train came just then, and it was like we weren't thinking about trains at all, and so that made us aware that you had to pay attention. So yeah, I remember the trains. The other thing that was here when I was really little, where Oxbow is out there, they had the pea vinery. And what the pea vinery was, it was a building that farmers around here were contracted, I believe, by Friday Canning Company and maybe some other canning companies to grow peas. And they would get picked, and farmers would haul that into town, and it would get dropped off at the pea vinery. And I do believe, because it was by the railroad tracks, I'd have to research it, but I believe some of those peas were loaded onto the trains then after they were gone through the vinery and shipped to wherever. So
you talked about the first Earth Day a little bit. Did you participate in that, and what did you do if you did participate in it?
I did, and back then when we were going to high school, girls could not wear jeans. You couldn't wear long pants. We always had to wear skirts. It was unthinkable if you wore jeans. You weren't allowed to wear jeans to school. But because of the first Earth Day, they wanted students to participate in going out in our community to clean up trash and whatever, especially along Highway 63. And so we were allowed to wear blue jeans. And that was a big deal. I mean, it sounds strange to you guys because girls wear pants all the time now. And but that was a special day for us girls to wear blue jeans. And so we went out and cleaned up dishes and brought our, they didn't have the nice plastic trash bags like they do now. I'm not even, if we had burlap bags, I'm not even remembering what we used, but to pick up trash out of the dishes, so.
Okay, yeah.
For any relatives who may watch this in the future, is there anything you would like them to know or remember?
I think the time that I grew up was a good time to be a kid, and we didn't have to be so fearful of things like we do now, and it's a great community, and I'm not that wise, so, but anyway, is there anything else you guys would like to know about?
Do you remember any major world events like the Vietnam War?
Yes, yes, the Vietnam War was going on, and when we were in high school, when you got to be about a junior and senior, the boys were very concerned if they were going to the draft was going on. And if you turned 18, you had to go register for the draft. It was federal law. And then if you were going to go to college, they generally let you go to college. But if you weren't going to college, you were a prime person to draft into the military. And so I know several people that went into the military. There was one guy from Clear Lake. His name is on the Vietnam Wall in Washington, D.C. He was shot and killed during the Vietnam War. Do you know Ray Kress?
No, I'm new here, so I don't know.
You're new.
He was just interviewed earlier.
Yes. He went to Vietnam. He was a soldier in Vietnam.
Is there any other thing you would like to talk about?
I was looking at these old newspapers here, and here's a big ad for a new Dodge Sportsman's wagon van. And, we're so used to always having power steering and automatic transmission and all that available. When you buy a car, you don't even think about it because it's always included. Well, here it was optional. And, just looking at the old ads of what the businesses that were around the Clear Lake area here. Yeah,
They're very cool.
Yeah,
History is awesome.
it is.
It's crazy how cheap stuff was back then.
Well, it is, but also wages, wages were less than what they were now. When I got out of high school, I went to beauty school to be a beautician. And so my first job was over in Amory at Corey's Beauty Shop, and I made $1.65 an hour, which isn't very much in today's world, but back then it it went further. So you see the prices of what a pound of hot dogs is 89 cents. And there were 60, these were my classmates. Some of the folks live in the community. We had 2 students in our class. Willie Scott died. He had kidney disease when he was a senior. And then Steve Melrood was killed in a car accident before graduation. And then Clear Lake Days, when Clear Lake Days first started, it was a new thing, and they had, in February, they had a Miss Clear Lake contest, and then the next year, it was in 1970 when I ran, I became Miss Clear Lake. And they moved the Clear Lake celebration from February to July, and it was held down at the Clear Lake Park, and it was called Clear Lake Appreciation Days. And because we had the creamery here in town, and there was a lot of dairy farmers, you could get all the free ice cold milk you wanted, and then free ice cream. And everybody came to the park, and it was like 1971 we were down at the park and they had pony rides and pontoon rides and the Miss Clear Lake concert, and here you were getting your free ice cream and stuff. And then a big deal, you can see all the people. Pete Cogbill is right there. He was a young man. They were doing the tug of war. You had teams. But you can see all the people that were there that day. And then it was, I want to say in the early 70s is when then 71, they started doing a parade uptown. And of course, that's what they do ever since, is having their parade and activities of Clear Lake Days. And back in the day, when I was a kid, we didn't have cell phones.
Yeah.
And do you want to see what one of the first phones
Yes.
that I grew up with? This was a picture. It's actually in my grandparents' house, which is where I live. This is what some of the first phones looked like. It was a big wooden box on the wall, and it had a crank on it. And then you had this hand, that right there was a handpiece, and then you talked into it. And then it was sometime after that, we got a phone, and it was called, looked more like a desk phone, and it had a crank on it. And so your phone number, ours was 2 longs and 3 shorts. You go, 2 longs, cranking it, and it toot, toot, toot. And then you'd call your neighbor or whoever. And so you also had a party line. And a party line was you had a phone, your neighbors had a phone. And the phones in your home would make a little bit of a chirp or whatever, so you knew somebody in your neighborhood was talking to somebody else.
So you could just butt in on
And then and it was especially women that would listen to your conversation. And that was called being a rubberneck because you had a cord on your phone receiver, and that was called being a rubberneck. So you always had to be careful what you said. And as a kid, it was I lived south of town, so we had phone service from Glenwood City. So it was long distance to call any friend in Clear Lake. So I never called friends because it cost money to call that friend. And so you just didn't do that. And it was parents talk to their kids in the morning. If you were staying after for a basketball game or something, we all walked uptown after the game, and where the Spirit Raising the Bar is, that was a restaurant. And kids, we could come in after the games and sit there and have a Coke or something, and then you'd wait for your parents to come. You didn't call them because you had no phone to call them on. So that was kind of a typical thing. And anything else you want to wonder about?
I don't know. I think you answered a lot of good questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you for listening.
You're welcome.
It's our
Okay.
pleasure.
Okay, we'll probably see you this summer.
Probably.